This video will contain spoilers for Rainworld and Rainworld Downpour, so please keep that in mind if you've yet to play them and would like to experience them blind first. Thanks! On March 28th, 2024, Rainworld celebrated its 7th birthday, and as a part of that celebration, we were introduced to Rainworld's newest upcoming DLC expansion, the Watcher. In this video, we'll explore what there currently is to learn about the Watcher, and we'll also do a little bit of speculation as to what it might have in store for us. I've made a couple videos recently that are similar to this one in the sense that I dug into new game or DLC trailers to discuss and analyse their contents. Unlike those videos, however, wherein I rambled somewhat nonsensically for upwards of an hour, I've decided to try a more structured approach with this video, in the hopes that it'll be a little easier to engage with. If you like this video, I'd love for you to stick around, but no pressure of course. Either way, please enjoy. Let's begin by briefly going over what was actually shown, starting with the trailer. Unfortunately, there isn't really a whole lot for us to dissect. It's more of a 30-second teaser than anything substantial. But there's still plenty to talk about. We open on a shot of some small insects hovering around what looks like derelict machinery. The insects scatter, disturbed by the presence of a blue lizard. It's at this point that we can spot some rot growing on the underside of a pipe in the background, which, when considered alongside the presence of a blue lizard, seems to suggest that this is taking place on 5 Pebbles' exterior. A pole plant reveals itself, and a scavenger quickly darts into frame for a moment before disappearing. The shot hangs here for a while, and then we suddenly see the glow of 2 eyes emerging from the darkness. A shadowy slugcat then steps forward and into view. The camera quickly zooms into their face, and then we cut to a reveal of the title. The screen is then consumed by this effect that bubbles out from the corners, and we transition into the final piece of artwork for the trailer. A black liquid lined with gold ripples out from the slugcat in the centre of the screen, and in the background we see faded ruins speckled with that same gold. This is essentially all there is to see in this trailer. There are some details that we'll explore a bit more later, but for now that's pretty much everything. Except that's not quite true. If you follow the trailer's instructions and go to wishlist the Watcher on Steam, which you absolutely should by the way, you'll notice that the Steam page has a whole lot more going on. First, the page description, which reads as follows. Rainworld the Watcher is a DLC expansion of Rainworld. Journey beyond to something, somewhere only ever glimpsed. When the world beneath your feet cracks and crumbles, will you hold on to all you once knew, or dive into the unknown? The wilds that await will be unlike all that's come before. Unknown creatures stalk and climb and dive and hunt. New breeds rip and pluck and burrow and hide. Predator and prey redefined. And through the middle of it all, a lonely lost slugcat trying their best to outlast the ravages of a warped world. So, whilst this is admittedly still quite cryptic, this small bundle of flavor text provides some insight into what this new expansion has in store. We won't dive into this too much just yet though. First, let's take a look at the other, much more eye-catching part of this page, the screenshots. Although the trailer didn't show us any actual gameplay, the Steam page instead provides us with 7 unique screenshots, giving us our first glimpse into what this expansion will look like. I'm going to go over each of them in more detail later on, but suffice it to say that these new environments look fantastic, and to some, maybe a little bit familiar. Beyond this, the only other significant information we received was from Akupara Games' community manager, who stated the following both in the official Rainworld Discord and in the news post about the expansion on Steam. The Fourth Slugcat of Rainworld has not been forgotten. Their time is coming. If you're unaware, the Fourth Slugcat of Rainworld is in reference to a piece of content that was cut from the original game when the Downpour DLC was added. Alongside Survivor, Monk, and Hunter, the Night Cat was a mysterious fourth slugcat that was only ever playable in one mode, the arena mode. Functionally, they were exactly the same as the Survivor in all aspects except appearance, as this is essentially how the arena mode treats every slugcat, regardless of who you select. As you might expect just from looking at them, they were likely intended to be a simple palette swap for the sake of arena mode, as this mode was the first official instance of Rainworld having 4-player co-op, and that obviously wouldn't work with just 3 playable slugcats. Thus, many assume Nightcat was born purely to fill the 4th slot, making it technically the 4th Slugcat of Rainworld despite not actually being a unique character with a campaign. When Downpour was released, however, the way that different characters were handled in the arena was changed to better accommodate the 5 new additions to the Slugcat roster, and with that, Nightcat was removed from newer versions of the game entirely. So then, it appears that this new Slugcat, the Watcher, is in fact a fully realised version of the Nightcat as a unique campaign, which some had already suggested based on their extremely similar appearance. We know Video Cult are open to revisiting cut content, as they did a very similar thing when Downpour released, in the form of the Slug Pups, so it's nice to see more shelved ideas getting their chance in the spotlight. But that's enough about Nightcat. Let's circle back around to the trailer and take a look at it in more detail, starting with this new logo. Unlike the logo for Rainworld or Rainworld Downpour, this logo appears to have a lot more going on. We can see what looks like rot growing in the A and H of the word Watcher, and there's also what looks like leaves and vines growing off of the C, H, and R. Interestingly, if you pay attention as the screen starts to be taken over, you'll notice that the rest of the letters are also overtaken with both rot and plant life before the scene transitions. This, to me, feels like a very intentional detail. Logos and title graphics tend to hold a lot of weight when it comes to presenting the core themes or ideas of a game, or in this case an expansion. I would be surprised if there wasn't anything to learn from these details, otherwise why put them here, especially when previous logos didn't have anything like this. I think this might be trying to tell us that 2 core themes of this new campaign will be the spread of rot and the forces of nature reclaiming the industrial world. You can see that even the effect that consumes the screen seems to depict the growth and spreading of rot, which further cements this idea. Considering this trailer seems to be taking place on 5 Pebbles, which is effectively ground zero for the outbreak of rot, it seems fair to say that the rot is going to be quite important to the Watcher's story. How exactly isn't quite clear though. Let's move on to this final piece of artwork from the trailer. Anyone who is at least somewhat familiar with the lore of Rainworld will likely recognize these design details as that of the Void Sea, and by extension the Echoes. The Void Sea is still very much a blind spot in the story of Rainworld. We have some vague ideas on what it is and how it can be used, but its true nature is ultimately still not quite understood. Or at least it isn't to me. Choosing to focus so heavily on these details for the main graphic of the expansion tells me that these too will be fundamental to the Watcher's story. In fact, to go a step further, if you zoom into the face of the Watcher, you can actually see the same goldish colour in their eyes, which might suggest that this Slugcat has a deeper connection with the Void than we originally thought. Interestingly, the combination of this strange rippling visual and the golden particles we see in the background is extremely similar to the way that the Echoes are depicted in the base game. If you're unaware, these Echoes are essentially remnants of Rainworld's ancient civilization, a people that sought to transcend the mortal plane via the Void Sea, but some were instead trapped in a sort of strange purgatory due to them not having fully rid themselves of mortal vices like greed or ignorance. Now, they can do nothing but watch and contemplate as the world marches on and the civilization they once built is slowly eaten away by the ravages of time. They're an important part of Rainworld's story, and it's incredibly interesting that the Watcher is depicted in such a similar way. It might even be that this Slugcat itself is an echo, or some scuggy equivalent, which could give us an explanation for its namesake. Most, if not all, of the playable Slugcats are named after their unique gimmicks or their narrative place within the world. For example, Survivor is self-explanatory, Rivulet is named after the term for a small stream, Gourmand likes to eat, you get the idea. Thus, it makes sense that the Watcher would be named a similar way. The other Echoes are essentially immortal, but they can't physically interact with the world in the same way that other beings can, so they're instead forced to watch eternally over the land as it shifts and deteriorates. It wouldn't be a stretch to describe them as Watchers, as that's all they can really do now, so perhaps this is why the Watcher is named this way. If this is true, it could have some pretty wild implications for what this campaign has in store, so I'm very interested in this detail in particular. But that's just about everything we can squeeze out of the trailer, so let's shift back to the Steam page. Rainworld the Watcher is a DLC expansion of Rainworld, Journey Beyond to something somewhere only ever glimpsed. This is intentionally super vague, but we can try to derive meaning from it. Journey Beyond implies that we'll be exploring beyond the bounds of the existing map, and something somewhere only ever glimpsed implies that these new places will be somewhere we haven't really experienced before. It's tough to really get much more out of this than that. When the world beneath your feet cracks and crumbles, will you hold on to all you once knew, or dive into the unknown? This is certainly in line with the motif in the logo, of both nature and Pebbles' rot taking over the world and wearing it down with the passage of time. The question of holding on to all you once knew or diving into the unknown seems to be presenting us with a choice, to either try to linger with what little remains of this dying world, or to perhaps embrace something new and see what comes next. The wilds that await will be unlike all that's come before. This could very easily just be more generic flavor text intended to hype up the new content, but I do wonder if there is genuinely some merit to this idea, that these new regions will feature some entirely unique mechanics to the rest of the game. We'll see later that there may be some hints of that in the screenshots, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Unknown creatures stalk and climb and dive and hunt. Put simply, this tells us we can expect to see new creatures in this expansion, which I think we could have guessed. We could try and interpret the nature of these creatures from how they're described, stalking, climbing, diving, and hunting, but I'll let you think about that one. New breeds rip and pluck and burrow and hide. New breeds specifically tells us we can expect new variants of existing creatures, like how there are so many different kinds of lizards. This description is also very interesting. Rip, pluck, and burrow all seem to imply a sort of interaction with the ground, so I wonder if we can expect a new type of lizard or other creature that will physically burrow in and out of the ground as an adaptation. Predator and prey redefined. I almost wonder if this is suggesting that the dynamic between different types of creatures is going to shift quite dramatically in this expansion. Perhaps some of these variants are going to play a vastly different role in the ecosystem to their counterparts. For example, maybe a vulture that's more of a prey animal than a predator. And through the middle of it all, a lonely lost slugcat trying their best to outlast the ravages of a warped world. This last line actually tells us a decent bit about our new slugcat. The Watcher is described as lonely and lost, which could tell us two things. One, that they're likely seeking company, perhaps their family, and two, that they've lost their way and likely want to return home. This is surprisingly similar to the story of Survivor and Monk, who get separated from their family and find themselves lost and alone in a foreign and hostile world. I wonder if perhaps the Watcher is, or was, at one point in a similar situation, separated from their family and forced to survive the unknown. The last part mentions that the Watcher is trying their best to outlast the ravages of a warped world, which could tell us a little bit about the state of the world when this campaign takes place. The world is in a warped and unstable state, so it seems safe to assume that we're probably somewhere near the end of the timeline, perhaps near the end of 5 Pebbles' desperate attempts to outlast the rot. We'll speculate more on this later, but it's an interesting detail. Next, let's take a closer look at the new screenshots. First, we get a look at the Watcher in-game, and they look pretty much like you'd expect. It doesn't look like they have any unique visual features or anything like that. More importantly, however, we get a look at this new desert-looking region, complete with a whole lot of sand and cacti. You'll notice that we can see the ends of pipes in the background, much like we do in garbage wastes and shoreline, as well as these reddish plants from farm arrays. These details, combined with the very similar looking colour palette, have led many to assume that this new region is in fact Badlands, a custom region by user Fishnoid. As you might be able to guess, Badlands is a region that offers a connection between garbage wastes and farm arrays, chock full of desert ruins to explore. This being a fan-made region would suggest that this DLC is going to adopt a very similar approach to Downpour, wherein community-produced regions and features are integrated into the game as official content through working alongside their creators. I think it's really cool to see more fan work recognised in this way, so I'm excited to see how these regions will turn out. Interestingly, I wasn't able to find a perfect match for this room on the original Badlands map, which makes me wonder if maybe this is a new room created specifically for the expansion. If anyone else is able to locate it, I'd love for you to share your findings. This next region, however, I was able to find a match for. This is Stormy Coast, an abandoned port region on the southern edge of Shoreline, created by user Rake. Admittedly, it took me a little while to track this one down, but you can see based on the positioning of the pipes that this is a 1-to-1 match. I only realised after doing so much digging that the original creator flat out confirmed on the page for Stormy Coast that they're a part of the development team for The Watcher. Regardless, this region connects to both Shoreline and another fan-made region that we'll get to later. Interestingly, you might notice that the map shows these little pockets of water beneath the pipes, whereas the screenshot from the expansion just has some loose foliage and mushrooms. I wondered initially if this was just a change made for the expansion, but I think it might actually just be a feature of this region specifically. The page for the mod describes how Stormy Coast has an emphasis on atmosphere, and that depending on which Slugcat you play as, the region will undergo striking visual changes. This could offer another hint as to when exactly in the timeline the Watcher's campaign takes place, but it also suggests that these regions will possibly be accessible to other Slugcats as well. Screenshot 3 is the one that a lot of people were quick to identify, myself included. This is Coral Caves, another region by Fishnoid. Funnily enough, the very first screenshot of the mod on Steam is pretty much a one-to-one match with the one used on the Watchers, so there you go. These colourful depths and cerulean shores make up a vibrant region teeming with unique flora and fauna, with connections to Sump Tunnel, Moon's submerged superstructure, as well as the previous region, Stormy Coast. This next screenshot is one I haven't been able to identify, so I'm curious if anyone else can match it to something. It looks like some sort of large structure akin to an iterator can, although it's been buried in what looks like either snow or some sort of white sand or dust. You might notice that the ground looks very similar to the screenshot of Badlands, which is something I want to talk about a little bit more. The way this ground looks is super interesting to me. It has this sort of flowing shape that looks less like static dunes and more akin to actively shifting ground. We talked earlier about how the page description suggests these new regions are going to be unlike anything we've ever explored, and I wonder if this is one way in which that will be achieved. A new sort of terrain in the form of shifting sand or snow that flows almost like water but is distinctly solid. I think this is a really compelling idea personally, and it connects to the talk about creatures that burrow and hide. I wonder if we'll see some unique creatures that take advantage of this shifting landscape to get the drop on their prey, concealing themselves in the flowing sand and waiting for an unsuspecting slugcat to fall into their jaws. It could also explain why I couldn't pinpoint the Badlands screenshot. It's possible that this is a new room designed specifically to facilitate this new mechanic. Screenshot 5 is probably the strangest of the bunch. Based on the high altitude, seemingly vertical layout and the abundance of satellite dishes and these X-shaped beams, a lot of people assume this is the mast. This custom region by user Snoodle is a large transmission spire on the western side of the map. It has connections to both Sky Islands and Subterranean, as well as the previously mentioned Badlands, so it seems like a safe bet. What's strange about this, however, is that the original map has a completely different colour palette, much more akin to something like The Wall, so this new pinkish purple look is certainly odd. It has an almost otherworldly feel to it, suggesting that maybe there's something strange going on in this screenshot specifically. I also wasn't able to locate the specific room on the original region's map, which is exceptionally odd as the creator also happened to create a massive version of the entire region as a single viewable image, and I still couldn't spot where this is meant to be. Once again, I'd be super interested if anyone else can find this specific spot. This next one's another one that I haven't been able to identify. I've only dabbled a little bit in fan-made regions, so it's possible I'm just not familiar with this one. I thought at first that it could be Pilgrim's Ascent, which is a sort of alternate version of Five Pebbles' exterior, made by user Mermice, but I couldn't find anything to support that idea beyond it looking vaguely like the Underhang. I've seen some people suggesting that one of the maps being added in this expansion is Aether Ridge, a massive region based around a desalination rig created by user Kporo. I'm not familiar with the map, so it's possible that this is where that screenshot came from, but I'm ultimately not sure. Finally, we have what looks like a Karma Gate, only it's in a state of disrepair and is seemingly flooded with either sewage or acid, or maybe both. This is another one that I haven't been able to match with an existing map, so if anyone knows what this could be, I'd love to hear it. The design of this gate is interesting because it looks a lot more like the gate leading into Pebbles rather than the standard gates we see across most of the map. Perhaps this is an entrance to another ruined superstructure. The presence of bubble fruit suggests that this place might be close to shoreline or garbage wastes, as you pretty much exclusively find these fruit near bodies of water. I'm not really sure what else to make of this one, so again I'd love to hear your thoughts. But that's just about everything we can discern from these screenshots. There's quite a wide variety of different environments on display, so I'm super interested to see how they all connect and the parts that they each play in the story of this new campaign. So now that we've covered just about everything there is to see, in as much detail as we can at this point in time, I'd like to finish by going over some of the larger questions that I, and I imagine many others, have about this new expansion. How big will this expansion be? We don't really have a clear idea yet on just how much content this will add. We could compare it to Downpour, which featured 10 new regions across 5 new campaigns, as well as significant overhauls to the entire map in each campaign to represent the passage of time. So far, we know that this is distinctly just the one campaign, and we've seen between 4 to 7 new regions so far based on the Steam screenshots, so I'd be inclined to think that this is going to be a bit smaller than Downpour. It's highly likely that there's a lot more we still haven't seen, but I'd keep expectations low until we hear more. Will the Watcher have any unique gimmicks? One of the main appeals for Downpour was the 5 new Slugcats, which each have very distinct gimmicks and playstyles that separate their campaigns quite drastically from the vanilla ones, and from each other. With this in mind, it seems silly to think that the Watcher is just going to be another Survivor clone, or something to that effect, so I think it's highly likely that they will also have some sort of unique gimmick to them. It's hard to really say at the moment what this could be, but I have one idea. In the trailer, we watch as a number of different creatures come and go from this particular spot, and it ends with the Watcher stepping out from the darkness and revealing themselves. I think this could suggest that the Watcher might be able to cloak or camouflage itself in the environment, blending in with their surroundings in such a way that lizards and scavengers don't seem to notice it. This could be an interesting mechanic, a sort of stealthier Slugcat that relies on sneaking around creatures and avoiding conflict rather than showering them with spears or bombs. It's definitely in line with the dark and shadowy vibe that this Slugcat gives off, and it even works fairly well with the name. The Watcher could silently observe its pursuers from the darkness, watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike or to escape. Who is the Watcher? Like we covered earlier in the video, we only know a small amount about this new Slugcat so far. They're described as lonely and lost, and they seem to have some sort of connection with the Echoes, but the rest is unclear. However, there's a fun detail that was included in Downpour that might be relevant here. If you complete Gormon's unique ending by journeying to the Slug Tree in the Outer Expanse, you might notice a peculiar looking Slugcat in the ending cutscene. At the time, most just assumed this was a neat little Easter egg for fans who remembered Nightcat before they were removed from the game. But now, this could very much be the Watcher themselves, which could tell us quite a lot about its backstory. Critically, it would imply that this Slugcat was one of the many that ventured out from its home alongside Survivor and Monk, following in Gormon's footsteps. However, we know from the opening cutscene of Survivor and Monk's campaign that the Watcher is nowhere to be found, which would imply that they were separated at some point, either willingly or due to a similarly unfortunate turn of events. It's unclear exactly what could have happened here, but we know that the Watcher eventually turns up on Pebbles' exterior, so clearly they made it into his facility grounds eventually. This would also potentially give us a rough idea on when this campaign takes place, that being around the same time as Survivor and Monk's journeys. However, I get the impression based on the way this has been presented to us that the Watcher has been here for a long time. The line, "a lonely lost Slugcat trying their best to outlast the ravages of a warped world," is what gives me this impression. It's specifically described as trying to outlast this world, not just trying to survive within it. That implies a prolonged persistence rather than basic survival as they try to find their way home. So I wonder if perhaps they've lived here for quite a long time. When does this campaign take place? If I had to guess, I'd place this campaign somewhere between Monk and Rivulet. It seems that enough time has passed that the world has fallen into severe disarray, but not so much that the rot is out of the picture like in Saint's campaign. It would also be odd if the Watcher's campaign had to deal with the short rain cycles of rivulets, as those are designed for Ruffles specifically. However, because the cycles return to normal after Rivulet pulls the rarefaction cell from Pebbles, it might be possible that the campaign instead takes place shortly after Rivulets. That would place us at a point in time where Pebbles is completely overtaken with rot and is essentially doomed, and Moon's power has been partially restored. I could maybe see this working, but I'm not sure how it would gel with where the narrative ends in the Rivulet campaign, as I feel like the main story between the two iterators is tied together quite nicely by that point. Ultimately, there are so many options for when this campaign could take place, so anything's possible. When will this expansion come out? At present, we don't have a release date for the Watcher, but we could once again use Downpour as a point of reference. Downpour's initial teaser also happened to release on March 28, only in 2022 for Rainworld's 5th anniversary, and it was strikingly similar in presentation to the one we received last week. The expansion was then released in January of the subsequent year on PC, and then in July for consoles. If we make the assumption that this DLC is aiming for something similar, that would give us a release date of around January 2025 at the very earliest. However, I can very easily see this being pushed back a bit in favour of releasing at the same time on all platforms, which could perhaps mean summer of next year. Again though, this is based on the assumption that they're aiming for a similar release window to Downpour, which is just speculation on my part. We really don't know how far into development this is quite yet, so I don't think it's reasonable to assume anything in terms of release dates. And finally, will you be covering more of the Watcher? In the likely event that we get more information in the lead up to release, I'd be super happy to cover it in a similar fashion to this, if that's what people would like to see. Downpour had a handful of small trailers and teasers following the initial reveal, so I wouldn't be surprised if we see something similar for The Watcher. I'm also almost definitely going to stream my first playthrough when it does eventually release. If you didn't know, I usually stream over on Twitch every weekend, although admittedly I've had to skip the past few weeks due to university, but I'm hoping to stream a lot more as we get closer to the summer. I might also consider doing an edited video of my playthrough over on this channel, sort of like the current series I'm doing with my friend Stella. If you didn't know, we're working our way through a co-op playthrough, as she's something of a novice when it comes to Rainworld, so I thought it would be fun to help ease her through it. If that sounds like something you'd enjoy watching, definitely check out the first video that went up a few weeks ago. I had a lot of fun making it. Apart from that, that's pretty much all I have to say on The Watcher for now. Once again, if you have anything to contribute or would like to point out anything I missed, please share that in a comment and I might try to compile it all into a pinned comment if there's a significant amount of findings. I hope this was both informative and enjoyable, and I'd love for you to subscribe if you want to see similar content from me in the future. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!